Hello and welcome to Criminal Justice in a Nutshell. My name is John Fisher. Today's topic is punishment and sentencing. I'm talking to you today from poolside at the La Quinta Inn here in Little Rock, Arkansas. Punishment and sentencing is an important issue because this is where judgment comes in. You hear a lot of people screaming and hollering and saying, "Don't judge me, don't judge me, don't judge me." Well, this is what a judgment is. When you're found guilty, you're sentenced for a crime, and you're punished for that crime, and that is the judgment. Okay? This is where judgment comes in. I can accuse you all day long of committing a crime. I can accuse you all day long of being a sinful person, but I'm not judging you guilty. I'm not finding you guilty, and I'm not punishing you to hell or prison or death or whatever. Okay. Excuse me. Punishment comes, judgment comes with the verdict, the sentence, and the punishment. There are several reasons for punishment. The first we want to talk about is rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is just that. We want to rehabilitate the offender. The offender has a drug problem. We want to get them off drugs. The offender has an attitude problem or an anger problem. So we send them to classes, we send them to treatment, we send them to counseling to make sure that they are rehabilitated and they can become a better member of the community. A lot of times this is done right in the community on probation. Sometimes it's a shock probation, you go to prison for a little while. But even in prison, they've got rehabilitation programs. Give you an education, because if you've got an education, you can get a better job. If you get a better job, you got more money. If you got more money, you're not going to commit a crime, or at least that's the theory. That's the theory. So we want to rehabilitate. The second is restitution. Restitution is when you pay back. Okay, so you steal something from me valued, well, you steal 2 chickens from me. In ancient days, you would have to give me 2 chickens plus 2 chickens. Today, if you steal 2 chickens from me, you'd have to pay for 2 chickens, and then there'd be a fine for my pain and suffering that you would have to pay as well. Restitution is all about money and your paycheck and your checkbook and paying fines and fees. Restoration is another purpose for punishment. Restoration is the sole purpose or the idea that we are going to restore things. We're going to make things, bring things back to the way that they were before the crime occurred. So if you spun donuts in my front yard under restoration or restorative justice, you'd be required to fix my front yard. You'd be required to take care of my front yard for a predetermined fixed period of time. You'd be responsible for taking care of my yard. And this way you've restored things, and you've not only restored my yard, you've also restored the trust that the community has in you as the offender. And that's really something. Okay, so I do all this work, and I restore things and I make things right. And we find this a lot in our country. If you apologize to somebody, and you turn around and you just say, "Hey man, I'm sorry, let me make this right," they'll give you the opportunity to make it right, and then they'll forgive you, and it's all done and said with, or all said and done with. So think about restorative justice. Okay. Retribution. We all like retribution. Retribution or just desserts. You've committed a crime, you've done the crime, now you're going to do the time. You're going to be punished for whatever crime that you committed. Whether it was stealing something, you're going to be put on probation. If you stole a lot of something, you're going to prison. If you rape somebody, you're going to prison for a long time. If you murder somebody, you're going to prison for the rest of your life. You could end up on the death penalty if you're committing another felony in the process of committing that murder. Okay, so retribution is just desserts. Then there's incapacitation. Incapacitation is the ideal or the desire to ensure that people are taken away from the community and kept away from the community so that they cannot commit any further harm against the community, because they're stored. They're warehoused out in a prison somewhere and nobody's bothering them. Okay. The types of sentencings that we have or the judges have available to them The first is what they've determined is indeterminate sentencing. And this is almost a historical form of sentencing now. It's not used that often. But indeterminate sentencing says, you've been found guilty, you're being sent to prison, and the judge says, okay, I'm going to send you to prison for 2 to 20 years. Okay. Well, you go to prison, and the prison decides when you get to go free. Have you done what you're supposed to do? Have you behaved properly? Have you done all of those things that you need to do as an offender? Have you met all the steps so that you can be released back into the population? The population don't like that a whole lot because we see that there's a lot of institutional racism. Yes, the R word, I used it. There's a lot of institutional racism that we find in indeterminate sentencing. We see if you get a black guy, a white guy, and a Hispanic guy, they're all sentenced for 2 to 20 years. Statistically, the white guy gets out of prison after 2 years. The Hispanic guy is in prison 10, 15 years. The African American or the black guy is going to be in prison for the entire 20 years. They're not going to let him go free. So this is disturbing. And the institutional racism that goes along with indeterminate sentencing caused us to move into determinate sentencing. This way, the human element, the human psyche, the human prejudice and racism and discrimination has absolutely no bearing in serving time in prison. If you are sentenced to 12 years, you're serving 12 years. If you're sentenced to 20 years, you're serving 20 years. And you're not getting out early. Okay, yes, I do know they've got the mathematics for the good behavior and the good time. And they've got the truth in sentencing law, which requires that you serve at least 60% of your time. Okay, and then you're available and you're capable of getting out. But you can acquire good time for completing programs, not getting into trouble, not causing problems. And you could get out earlier, but you're still on paper, you're under mandatory supervision or parole for an extended period of time until your punishment has been completed. The third type of sentencing that we have is mandatory minimums. Florida has a lot of mandatory minimums. And what this says is if you have been found guilty of this crime, you have to serve this much time, period. It's a mandatory minimum. This is attached to, with the 3 strikes laws and the aggravated stances like we have in Texas. But the 3 strikes law says if you commit 3 felonies, you go to prison for the rest of your life without the possibility of parole. And there's a story of a guy, he is in California. At 18 years old, he got busted for burglary. He was sentenced to 5 years. 23 years old, he gets out of prison. He goes and he rapes a young woman. He gets out of prison. I don't think he was out of prison for a week. And he raped a woman, got arrested, was sentenced to 20 years. Okay, he gets out of prison at 45 years old. He walks into Walmart and he steals $300 worth of DVDs. Guess what? That's his 3rd felony. And he has been sent to prison for the rest of his life without the possibility of parole for stealing DVDs from Walmart. That's the 3 strikes law. Once you've been determined a habitual criminal, you're done. You have no choice. You have no options. You are going to prison for the rest of your life. A lot of states and the federal government also have a sentencing guidelines. Sentencing guidelines allow us to say, okay, well, this is the offense. This is how many times you've committed this offense, or this is the severity of the offense, and you match them on the little graph, and that's the recommended or suggested punishment, the guideline. They're not constitutional, so the judges can't be forced to follow them. But they're there as a guide. They're there as a highly recommended suggestion. But judges are judges. They don't have to follow the guidelines if they don't want to. The last topic we want to discuss today in the few minutes that we have left is the death penalty. The death penalty is currently legal in 36 states and the federal government. The death penalty is the ultimate sanction. It is specific deterrence. If you were convicted, found guilty, and sentenced to die, you will never commit a crime again because you're dead. Okay, well, we find ourselves really looking into this. There's a lot of court cases coming around that state that the death penalty is unconstitutional. The death penalty is wrong. Well, in order to remove the death penalty from the United States, you're going to have a constitutional amendment. The Article 6 of the Constitution talks about, Article 6 of the Constitution talks about treason. The punishment for treason is established by Congress and can include the death penalty. So as long as the death penalty is listed as a possible punishment in the Constitution, it is going to be a possible punishment for the states. And the only way to do away with that is through a constitutional amendment. But there's court cases every day that come up to try to restrict the use of the death penalty, to try and bring an end to the death penalty. The United States is the only industrialized first world nation that still has the death penalty. Most people just send their offenders to prison for the rest of their life without any possibility of parole. But it's necessary and it's important that you understand that the death penalty is constitutional, and the only way that you're going to be able to get rid of it is through a constitutional amendment. There's a new case that came out this week. It came out on Monday. From Monday, for those of you reading this or listening to this on July 1st, 2015. But there's a recent case. It was Glossip versus Gross. It's a Texas case about the sedative that Texas gives before the execution. Go find it. Go read it. It's a very interesting case. Okay, I want to thank you for joining me for Criminal Justice in a Nutshell. My name is John Fisher. Have a good day.